Coming up on Arirang News, the entire crew of the cargo ship that capsized 2 days ago in the U.S. has been rescued, including the 4 South Koreans who'd been trapped inside. Still no information as to what caused the ship to turn over. South Korean President Mnuchin lays out a task for the country to develop the parts and materials industry, not only to deal with Japan's restrictions on trade, but as a framework for the next 100 years. And the government announces plans to help Korea's small businesses break out online and overseas. One of the ways they'll do that is through this channel, Arirang TV. It's 4 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for tuning in to our afternoon newscast. I'm Devin Whiting. The U.S. Coast Guard has rescued the final 4 crew members who'd been trapped inside a cargo ship that capsized over the weekend in waters off the U.S. state of Georgia. The ship is managed by the South Korean firm Hyundai Glovis, and it was carrying more than 4,000 vehicles. Our Hong Yu has more.
All 4 South Koreans who were trapped inside the ship called Golden Ray have now been rescued. They were the last of the 24 people who were on the ship at the time of the incident, and everyone is now safe. The U.S. Coast Guard said they extracted 3 of the remaining 4 crew members on Monday afternoon from the propeller shaft room near the ship's stern. But one of the 4 was in a different area, and so another plan was needed to get him. A fire had impeded the rescue process at first, but it was put out Monday morning, allowing the Coast Guard to drill through the ship's hull to find the missing 4. Then the rescuers rappelled down from a helicopter into the hull and found the first 3 safe. South Korea's Consul General of Atlanta was at the scene and said in a briefing after the initial rescue that by talking with the first 3, they were able to indirectly verify that the other man was still alive. He was rescued later in the day at around 6 p.m. from behind glass in the ship's engineering compartment where he was trapped. All 4 rescued are in good condition and being examined in hospital.
I think they were pretty relieved. I don't have information on what they said. I know they looked super happy to be outside of that space and coming down onto the tugboat.
The Golden Ray had left the port of Brunswick early Sunday, headed for Baltimore, but just about 1.5 kilometers from the coast, it started listing heavily. It's not clear why it tilted over, but the authorities are investigating the incident. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
North Korea has offered to resume talks with the U.S., suggesting late this month is a time frame. President Trump didn't immediately jump on the chance, though, saying he'll see what happens. Lee Seung-jae has this story.
In a statement carried by the North state-run media Korean Central News Agency, the regime's first vice foreign minister, Choi Sun-hee, says she has taken note of Washington's repeated calls for a resumption of talks, and Pyongyang is willing to resume talks as long as Washington comes up with a new proposal acceptable to the North. According to Choi, North Korea is willing to sit with the U.S. for comprehensive discussions of the issues the 2 sides have discussed so far, with the talks to happen at the time and place to be agreed late in September. The regime's vice foreign minister believes that the U.S. has had enough time to come up with a proposal geared to the interests of the North and the U.S., and warned that should the next proposal fall short again, North Korea-U.S. dealings may come to an end. The latest comments coming out of North Korea comes as U.S. officials have consistently urged Pyongyang to return to talks, despite the regime's continued testing of short-range ballistic missiles. Speaking to reporters at the White House shortly after Choi's statement, U.S. President Donald Trump said meetings are a good thing, and he'll see what happens. Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un had agreed to resume denuclearization talks within several weeks when they met at the inter-Korean border in June, but the talks have yet to take place. The U.S. State Department has yet to confirm any meeting between the 2 sides just yet, but hopes are high that the next meeting will lead to a positive outcome. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff have confirmed that North Korea fired another round of projectiles this morning. It's the 10th launch of its kind this year. Our correspondent Lee Ji-won is on the line for us. Ji-won, what's the latest?
Devin, the Joint Chiefs of Staff announced early this morning that North Korea fired 2 short-range projectiles earlier today toward the East Sea from an inland site in Pyeongan-namdo province. The first one was fired at around 6:53 a.m., followed by another one about 20 minutes later. The type of projectile is still unidentified, but they flew roughly 330 kilometers, and the South Korean military says it's analyzing the missiles together with the U.S. Now, the JCS said the South Korean military is monitoring the situation in case there are more launches while maintaining a readiness posture. It also criticized the North for raising tensions on the peninsula, while again urging the North to cease such acts. Now, it was 17 days ago, in late August, that the North fired 2 projectiles from what it claimed was a newly developed multiple rocket launcher. This is the regime's 10th streak of tests this year, and it comes just hours after North Korea's Vice Foreign Minister Choi said the North is willing to talk with the U.S. at a time and place to be agreed in late September. A military source says Pyongyang's latest launch is an attempt to pressure Washington and a way for them to get the upper hand in their talks. Now, South Korea's nuclear envoy Lee Do-hoon is reported to have spoken on the phone this morning with his U.S. counterpart Stephen Biegun and agreed to meet in person to continue the discussion on the latest series of events. Meanwhile, with Seoul and Tokyo getting closer to the end of their military information sharing pact, Japan has not yet requested for information on today's launch. That's all from me for now.
All right, Ji-won, we appreciate it. Lee Ji-won reporting from the National Ministry of Defense. Now, at the presidential office, the National Security Council Standing Committee convened an emergency meeting Tuesday morning led by Presidential National Security Advisor Chung Eui-yong. According to the Blue House, the council expressed strong concerns over North Korea's continued missile launches over the past several weeks. The meeting was held through a video conference session starting at 8 this morning. Now, the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies has allocated $57,000 as emergency aid for North Koreans affected by Typhoon Ling. According to Voice of America, the IFRC is using the fund to support 28,000 people in Hwanghae-do, Pyeongnam-do, and Hamgyong-do provinces, where the typhoon passed through over the weekend. The money was used before the storm arrived to alert people of its path and the damage it might cause, and afterwards, it's being used for on-the-ground surveys. The Red Cross is distributing essential relief to the elderly, pregnant women, and the disabled. It says the typhoon will mean a smaller harvest for the North this fall. Every year since 2004, on today's date, September 10th, it's been observed as World Suicide Prevention Day. The aim is to raise awareness of the issue and find ways to stop people from taking their own lives. South Korea has one of the highest suicide rates in the developed world, so the government has also made it a national observance. Our Ji-young has more.
Data suggests that globally, someone takes their life every 40 seconds. According to new figures published Monday by the World Health Organization, the number of suicides around the world in 2016, standard by age, was 10.5 per every 100,000 people. The WHO in its report said one important way the global suicide rate can be brought down is to restrict access to pesticides which can be used for self-poisoning. For instance, Sri Lanka's suicide rate from 1995 to 2015 dropped by a whopping 70% after certain dangerous pesticides were banned. Similar measures in South Korea reduced suicide numbers by half from 2011 to 2013. Despite these efforts, South Korea's suicide rate has been the highest among the OECD countries since 2005. The rate in 2017 stood at 24.3 people in every 100,000. The first World Suicide Prevention Day was commemorated on September 10, 2004. In 2011, South Korea made National Suicide Prevention Day a national observance and designated the week starting on that date as Suicide Prevention Week to educate people, raise awareness, and ultimately prevent people from taking their own lives. Just this Monday, ahead of this year's observance, the government launched a National Suicide Prevention Committee. Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon, who chairs it, said the current administration is the first to put the issue at the top of the national agenda.
It is important to set up a tight safety net in local communities to prevent suicide. We can prevent suicide only when more local communities work together.
The committee is planning to push forward with various programs such as a care system for senior citizens living alone, doing more to protect the vulnerable, and running community mental health centers and encouraging respect for life. 엄지영, Arirang News.
President Moon Jae-in has again called for the strengthening of the country's parts and materials industry, which he says is crucial to the Korean economy. He was speaking this morning in a cabinet meeting held unusually at a government-funded research institute that focuses on localizing technologies. Park Ki-jun has the details.
President Moon Jae-in has reaffirmed his government's determination to strengthen South Korea's competitiveness in parts and materials. According to the president in a cabinet meeting Tuesday, the next century of the Korean economy depends on it.
소재 부품 장비 산업 경쟁력 강화는 경제 강국을 위한 국가 전략 과제입니다. 한일 관계 차원을 뛰어넘어 한국 경제 100년의 기틀을 세우는 일입니다.
President Moon says strengthening the industry, especially through localization, will allow Korea to rebound as a manufacturing powerhouse. And because the producers of industrial materials are mostly smaller companies, nurturing the industry will mean nurturing those firms. The president explained that it will lead to more collaboration between companies large and small. He added that it could help respond to the growing uncertainties in the global economy and rising trade protectionism. The cabinet also approved the launch of a presidential committee on enhancing local competitiveness in those sectors as a response to Japan's trade restrictions. President Moon says it will lead efforts to support relevant firms and policies. He also vowed to double government funding for related R&D next year. For that, Seoul's Trade Ministry reported to the president that it will inject around $183 million into the supplementary budget. Instead of gathering at the Blue House as usual, the cabinet met at the Korea Institute of Science and Technology in Seongbuk-gu, northeastern Seoul. The institute has been spearheading the localization of technology, producing miraculous developments, according to Moon, in steel, shipbuilding, semiconductors, and cars. The president inspected its progress in localizing parts and materials technology.
이 공정에서도 예를 들면 일본의 부품 소재가 꼭 필요한 그런 게 있습니다.
여기서는 지금 사실 여기 3개 장비는 프랑스 장비고요. 수입해야 될 그런 재료는 필요 없습니다.
Later in the day, President Moon made a surprise visit to a one-stop service center at the Korea Chamber of Commerce and Industry, which helps Korean firms in their difficulties getting supplies of key parts and materials due to Japan's export curbs. The president asked that the center continue to swiftly assist the companies in resolving their problems. Park Ki-jun, Arirang News.
The channel you're watching, Arirang TV, will be helping Korea's small businesses reach customers when they try to enter the online market and sell overseas. It's part of a plan by the government to help these firms that often have a hard time taking the first steps in these markets. Yoon Jung-min has the details.
Small businesses will get more chances to make inroads into the fast-growing online market, including mobile shopping. The government and the ruling Democratic Party said on Tuesday that it plans to provide consulting services for small firms to help them sell their products online and advertise goods with content creators and influencers. Also, they will be given a chance to sell goods overseas through Arirang TV and global shopping malls.
To promote overseas sales, the advertisements will be aired to the world through Arirang TV, and we plan to hold consulting conferences to enter global shopping malls. Also, the product promotion will be linked to global K-Wave events, such as the Mnet Asia Music Awards.
The online market has grown more than twofold over the past 5 years in South Korea, but small shop owners often have limited access to enter the market due to a lack of information and manpower. That's according to the Ministry of SMEs and Startups. Small shops will be able to sell goods using smart technology such as smart orders, smart mirrors, or smart maps to facilitate delivery services or manage their business. Also, gift certificates used in traditional markets and small shops will be increased by some $839 million to $4.6 billion. To boost the traditional markets, more events and tour packages will be available. Small businesses with a low credit rating will be eligible for more loans as the government and the party look to raise financial accessibility for such firms. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
It's time now for an in-depth look at the global markets this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, global strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, thanks as always for coming on.
Thank you for having me, as always.
Well, today, trade on Wall Street overnight, was mixed. Still not sure where the U.S. and China are going on trade, despite some recent good news. Stocks in Korea today up a fair bit. What's the story?
Yes, as you said, U.S. market seems to be fairly volatile. If you look at the Dow Jones Industrial Average, it posted its fourth straight gains on Monday amid the more optimism regarding U.S.-China trade tensions. However, though, tech shares were falling, that kept the index gains in check. Most of the indices start to rise on the news that China offered last week to increase purchases of U.S. agricultural goods if U.S. eased the restriction on telecom giant Huawei. And also, China said that if the U.S. delaying the higher tariffs on 250 billion won worth of Chinese import, then the purchase of the agricultural goods will happen. So all these things are contingent agreement. So we're not sure whether this will actually occur. But Treasury Secretary Mnuchin said that the possibility of some kind of deal is likely. So that's showing that's the reason why the prices were fairly reasonably okay. As for the Asian equity markets, it's fairly mixed on Tuesday. Chinese stocks have underperformed because the country's producers' price index fell 0.8%, which is one of the lowest numbers that we have seen in 3 years. So that's the reason why the price of the Shanghai Composite are down by 0.1% or so, and the Shenzhen index is down by 0.4% or somewhat. And also for the Japanese market, it seems to be rebounding by about 0.35%. The news on the Nissan Motors have affected positively, them moving 3% plus. As for the Kospi also, it continues to rise by 0.6%, despite the uncertainty regarding the political arena. But nevertheless, most of the Asian market seems to be doing reasonably okay upon the news that the trade deals might happen.
Got it. Well, let's talk oil for a second. Saudi Arabia says it's going to keep cutting production. A new oil minister there apparently trying to prop up the market a bit. Where do you see oil prices going?
Yes, I just said that oil price has been moving up in the last 4 trading days. Upon the news that the OPEC will continue to have production limitations or production cuts that will last for the longer period of time. The oil minister have said that they will continue to uphold the agreement to reduce the productions. And also the Iraq's, the cartel's second largest oil producers behind Saudi Arabia has always exceeded its output cap almost every month for more than 2.5 years now. And now the Iraq is saying that they're ready to get on board about cutting the productions. So this is the reason why the oil price is moving up in the last 4 days. So the OPEC Plus alliance fairly much are saying that the productions will be down and that resulting into the oil price rise. But still, Russia's oil output in August exceeded its quota under the OPEC Plus agreement. And the shale gas production by U.S. will continue to be showing a rising trend. And they are the #1 oil producer of the world now. So having said that, continuation of continued production capacity being raised, that means the oil price is not going to go further up higher to the $70, $80 as we've seen before. But most likely the oil price will be range bound somewhere between $50 to $60 in the future.
Right. Well, this year we see GDP growth being revised down globally and here in Korea. And they say the economy here, the potential growth has been falling for years, according to the BOK. How is the economy doing in Korea, and what's your near-term outlook?
Well, clearly the economy is not doing well. Most of the people are saying, and I agree, that Korean economy has entered a new era, so-called new normal of three lows. Low growth, low interest rate, low inflation. It seems to be clearly these things are becoming realities. The reason for all this is that the labor side, the unemployment ratio is not falling, and continuation of the disposable income growth being very low or actually negative territories is affecting consumers' consumption not picking up. And also because of the recessionary environment per se, making the corporation not spending additional money for capex, and they're actually investing money overseas rather than investing within Korea. So that's all affecting the overall growth rate to decline quite sharply. As you already know, that first quarter of this year fell shockingly by 0.4%, which is a contraction that we haven't seen in a very long period of time. And then the second quarter has recovered to 2% growth rate. But nevertheless, it's much below the intrinsic possible growth rate of Korea. We think that the growth rate potential has declined, and probably it's now around 2% territories, which is slightly higher than U.S., but nevertheless, it is one of the lowest numbers that we are seeing. Until some of the problems are solved in regards to the additional competitiveness in the export arena as well as consumers' consumption areas, we're not going to see growth rate jumping to 3% or anything like that. Most likely over the next several years, Korea's growth rate will remain at 2% to 2.5% range.
Yeah, some eye-opening numbers coming out this week. All right, Mr. Yu, that's where we'll have to stop for today. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, U.S. Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin says the U.S. and China have what he called a conceptual agreement on enforcement concerns, maybe a sign of progress in their trade talks. Speaking to Fox Business Network on Monday, Mnuchin hinted at what's to come when the two sides resume their high-level talks next month. However, Mnuchin also warned that President Trump has no problem keeping his heavy tariffs on Beijing if a deal cannot be reached. The two sides appeared to be on the brink of a deal earlier this year, but negotiations fell apart in early May, leading both sides to impose more tariffs. The UK House of Commons has again rebuffed Prime Minister Boris Johnson's attempt to call a snap election. Only 293 lawmakers voted in favor of the motion in the early hours of Tuesday local time, leaving it far short of the two-thirds majority it needed due to many abstentions. Johnson's call for an early election came after a new law looking to prevent a no-deal Brexit was granted royal assent on Monday. The no-deal legislation forces the Prime Minister to delay Brexit until January 31st next year, unless he manages to make a deal with the EU or gets approval for a no-deal Brexit from lawmakers by October 19th. The Seoul Metropolitan Government will implement special traffic measures for the upcoming Chuseok holiday to help people travel more conveniently and safely. For September 13th and 14th, which are the day of Chuseok itself and the day after, the subway and public buses will run until 2 a.m. There will also be an extra 3,100 taxis on the roads at night during the holiday. Be advised that in terms of medical care, 521 emergency rooms will be open round the clock across the country, but many smaller clinics will be closed. For non-emergencies, an average of 6,800 hospitals, clinics, and pharmacies nationwide will be open each day from September 12th to the 15th. More information can be found by visiting the city's website, contacting the Dasan call center at 120, or by calling 119 in an emergency. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.